Yeah, your microphone is good. I've done a few recordings with just ear pods. So, as long as we can hear you, it is absolutely fine. Today, I want to welcome my guest, Julia Song. She's from Brazil, a writer, commentator, activist. She is a contributor to EV Magazine, where she writes quite a bit about socialism, feminism, and kind of their symbiotic relationship. So, Julia, thank you so much for agreeing to join me today.
Thanks for having me.
I did like to take a moment and maybe introduce yourself a little bit. I know that you have like a whole story, but you also have a great article where you share your story in Brazil and everything like that. So you don't have to go into any deep dive into that aspect. I'll probably provide a link in the show notes so everybody can kind of read your backstory. But if you just want to give a general introduction.
So basically, I was born in one of the most violent and poorest places in South America. And my family suffered political persecution. So it was a little bit difficult for my mother to provide for us. So we had to deal with a lot of actual, having to fend for ourselves. I feel like a lot of it can be romanticized in the US, like socialism, which is what we were basically standing up against. And also, people think of like strong female characters that are incredibly badass, but in reality, they don't really know what that means and what it takes to become that type of person here in the US. I feel like a lot of it,
they see like a media interpretation of it, or kind of
it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy. So they have this idea of like what it feels like to be empowered and what it feels like to be in control and to have, all of these dreams about socialism, but they don't understand what comes with it because, the basic thing against socialism, or the basic thing within capitalism is that, which is the system that is most natural to us and has been for the longest time, is that nothing comes for free. Everything is an exchange. So if you want to become that type of person that is, incredibly independent and self-reliant and etc., there is a giveaway. There's something you're going to give up. And that a lot of times is something that I don't think people should give up as part of themselves. I feel that it's sort of like a disability, like a handicap, because yes, you become stronger in a way, but you also become weaker in other ways that you don't necessarily need to be pursuing. And same thing with socialism is, there's a giveaway where people think, oh, I'm just going to receive all these free resources, but you're going to have to give up a lot. And the trade-off isn't really, great. It's basically a big scam.
Yeah. Well, because at least my vision or how I would see socialism is a lot of times it's romanticized in a way that if this is provided for me, if this is given to me, it frees me up for me to pursue XYZ or to do what I want because I don't have to worry about, I don't know, healthcare or food on my table or whatever programs that might be provided. It's like less stress. So they see it as more freedom, but then at the same time, it includes dependency. So, you're putting control of your aspects of your life in somebody else's hands. Now, you mentioned, why you were kind of explaining that about self-reliance, how you feel. I don't know if I didn't quite understand it, but you felt that self-reliance also requires some giving up or some, like that you're, I wasn't really 100% sure like what you meant by that.
So what I meant is that when you look into feminism, they have all these strong female stereotypes, and if you think about it, for example, let's talk about my mom. My mom will be the perfect feminist hero. She was a single mother of two, and she had a degree in business administration, and she was also a lawyer. So she was working to provide for her two children in a very difficult environment. So, the typical hero, whatever. But when you come to actually look at it, her situation, the fact that she didn't have a partner, whenever things went down, they went down very quickly. She felt like she didn't need anyone, she didn't need no man. But then at the same time, when we became homeless, she wasn't able to provide for the family. It was just us. There was nobody to have that sort of support system. And it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to develop healthy relationships. It's okay to have a partner that you can rely on. So a lot of, she focused on her career, and me and my brother, we grew up sort of like thinking that we were left on our own. She had a lot of stress. She had a lot of headaches all the time, migraines, and she didn't really get to interact with us.
You were talking more about in the sense of having a partner or having some type of support system that a lot of times, I mean, in feminism, if you use it or look at it strictly in the scope of feminism, self-reliance is like, I can do my own thing. I can take care of myself. I don't need a man. It's usually typically like in that mentality. Is that what kind of, not saying that that was your mother's mentality, but that's just kind of in general, single woman on her own, doing her thing, earning her money and providing. Typically it doesn't matter. It's my belief that we are meant to have partnership in order to relieve that load and that stress. Is that kind of where you were going with that?
It was absolutely her mentality. She was very too proud to ask for help. But at the same time, the children were suffering. We didn't have that type of motherly relationship. We didn't have a father figure growing up. We didn't have any sort of support system. So when you think about feminism in the sense of like the strong, independent stereotype, you sort of think of it as an illusion that doesn't really include things like how would your kids actually feel? Are you going to have time to go to their school meetings? Are you going to have time to go to their games? Are you going to have time to check their homework? Are you going to have time to figure out early signs of disease or mental illness or things that they're struggling with? Or maybe if there's somebody who's talking to them online, are you going to have the ability to do that? Are you going to have the ability to, make sure that they're eating healthy meals? Are you going to have the ability to make sure that you're eating healthy meals, that you're getting enough sleep, that you're taking care of yourself, that you're staying healthy? So I feel like a lot of it is just a big illusion. So when it comes to self-reliant, I meant sort of like, I don't need a man, but also in a situation of physical danger. So when people think of like the female superheroes or the badass female, role models on TV, where they always want to be like the Black Widow from Avengers, whatever, right? Everybody loves that.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you would have known what it takes to become that type of person, you probably wouldn't necessarily be willing to trade off.
Yeah, all that sacrifice that you have to give in order to be this badass chick or whatever, or be the provider, be the, whatever caricature, whatever that you want it to, that you're envisioning, the amount of work and sacrifice that it takes to get there. Not most people are willing to do that. And honestly, I believe that we're not necessarily meant to do that. We're not meant to do that. We are meant to be in partnerships and be together. And the only reason I asked you to kind of clarify what you meant about self-reliance is that I use that term very often for myself, but I use it more to define myself as being self-reliant from the government, from large institutions, that me and my husband together are doing everything possible where we're able to, have food security, have a roof over our heads, just like those bare necessities, and not being dependent on the government. Because if we are, then we're handing over control on aspects of our life over to the government. But, when you clarify and you talk about it, it's also an aspect of like this feminist idea of I'm on my own, and then romanticizing of, being the boss babe, badass chick or whatever. It's my belief that we're not really designed, men or women. I don't really believe that we're designed to be that way, that we're designed to be on our own on top of having children by ourselves. And in that sense, I think a lot of times when you do have that structure of a woman alone with her children, you do need support. And then a lot of times that support is opened up and has welcomed the government in. So with your experience of being raised with a single mother and in a country where there was a lot of socialist systems, have you ever thought about whether feminism is, because right now, like the ideas of socialism seem to be brewing and becoming more popular here in the United States. But there's no question that along with that, back in the past, the feminist movement had a big force here in the United States. Do you think there is any possibility that feminism is a contributor to opening up or being okay with the idea of socialism here in the United States? Not that it's the only thing, but like a contributing factor?
Yeah, I think it's part of the same type of ideology, the same part of ideology that doesn't consider the consequences of your actions, that thinks that everything is going to be perfect, that everything is going to be, amazing. Like, for example, let's look at I don't know why bringing up superheroes so much, but if you think about, for example, Batman, how did he become Batman? He had to endure a lot of trauma, losing his parents, all those different and difficult things to become who he is at that point. So if you think about it from the perspective of, you see how he is today and you think, oh my God, this is awesome. But if you take a look, if there was just a movie about his past, including nothing but the years and years of therapy that he went to, all the times that he was crying under his bed, people wouldn't watch that because people don't like to see the bad side of things. They just like to see the pretty side of things, right? And so the same thing with feminism and socialism, they don't consider the realities of it. And a lot of the times they think that those ideas of how they want the future to be justify certain actions that they may take today. So, for example, in order for us to have a big, beautiful, united society in the future, we're going to have to start taking some measures today, whatever those measures are, whether it is taking assets from people because people don't know how to invest their own assets or they don't know how to take care of their own assets, whether it is taking your kids away because you're putting different ideas in their heads and you're trying to homeschool them when we want them to learn something else. Maybe, and so it sort of like justifies it because of that idea of the future. But what you're putting people through never actually justifies it, right? I think 100% Batman will probably prefer to have his parents back than, put on a leather suit. So to me, it's like you're causing a lot of hurt and a lot of pain for people today. You're putting these ideas in people's heads. You're making them seem so beautiful, but they're actually just ruining people's lives for an utopia, something that may or may not happen in the future. Usually doesn't happen.
Because the concept is a lot of times is like, if we would just all do this, like this same thing for everyone and everybody kind of participated in the same program, same idea, then we would ultimately have a utopia. And I see, first of all, you can't see into the future. So you don't know what you will ultimately have. And also I find that a lot of times there's just like a complete disregard of human nature, as if all of a sudden we're all going to be like robots and be like, yeah, I'm down with this and everything's going to be cool.
Yeah, like my mom, she was always thinking about her career. And then you add two kids to it, you add bills, you add things like, just rest time, meals, keeping up with her kids, etc. The day only has 24 hours. And so are you not going to sleep? Are you not going to work? Are you not going to take? So it's sort of like it goes against logic. It goes against basic logic, against basic human nature. It's just it sells people on a lie that makes them more vulnerable and more dependent on the government. And then at that point, it's like, we own you, and you become is sort of the utopia of it is a very dangerous aspect, because it's sort of like a cult. It makes people go all the way, and even if as things are going bad, they don't realize that it's going bad. They try to justify it. So in the Soviet Union, when they were putting people into camps, those people they were doing that, but they were justifying it. They're justifying, oh, I'm doing this because I'm going to help everybody else. I'm doing this. I'm putting a bullet in this person's head because of, and so you're trying to justify bad actions because you're stuck to that ideology so bad that it's sort of brainwashing you, and that's how they connect these two ideologies.
So I didn't even. It wasn't until I started reading some of your pieces and watching some interviews and stuff like that you had done that I ever really thought of Brazil having a socialist aspect to it. Like, I knew Brazil is a very large, I think it's the largest South American country, and that there was a great deal of poverty, but my background is I'm Puerto Rican and I've lived here in the United States. So like, that's the extent that like I'm Latin, but my knowledge, there's a lot of people in the United States don't understand like how many Latin countries there are and how we're all like so different. So I didn't really know that, or I had never really associated that there had been I don't know if an infiltration of socialism is a fair way to present it. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but they're not like a socialist country. It's that there has been socialist programs put in, or what some people would claim to be socialist programs put in, that have had negative effects to the economy and to the country. Is that fair?
No, it was fully blown socialism. So what happened was a little bit of a history class, if anybody cares about it. It's like one of those dumb subjects. Not dumb, but like stuff that people really don't care about. When it comes to like knowing what's going on, a big part of it, it's dependent on the media. So for example, if I ask you what's going on with Nicaragua, with Daniel Ortega, you may not know. A lot of people in America may not know that there's a dictatorship going on, that there's a lot of people dying in Nicaragua right now. But what happened was Brazil was undergoing a lot of political changes. There was a lot of difficulty with the presidential office. Presidents were coming in and out. There was a lot of confusion as to what actually was
like
going on.
Who was president, essentially? Like, there's a lot of confusion. It's like, who's even president?
Yeah, sort of like that. Like the guy that was supposed to take it, nobody actually liked him. Everybody hated it. So there was a lot of turmoil around the presidency. At the same time, the Soviet Union was establishing themselves in, that part of Russia. They were putting a lot of money towards indoctrinating people in Brazil and in Latin American countries. You see that in Colombia, you see that in Venezuela, you see that in Bolivia with some of their leaders. So they were funding these communist cells around the world because strategically, Brazil was in a great geographic position to allow them to, they wanted to become partners, basically. And so they started funding this communist cells and things like that. But at the time that there was a big turmoil in the presidency, the army thought, hey, there's an actual chance that these communists who were arming themselves are going to attempt a coup to take over the presidency, and we're not going to allow that. So what happened was that the military took over the government, and it wasn't a coup. It was basically they had elections, but you had to vote for somebody who was in the military. But it wasn't necessarily.
So all the candidates were military.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to make sure that the communists weren't in power. Then what happened next was a big civil war of kinds of sorts between the communists and the military and the traditionalists in Brazil. Eventually, the military was like, all right, I think we sort of tired of it, and we sort of, the communist threat went away. So we're giving the executive office back to, everybody else who wants to run, anybody else who wants to run.
To the people, like, to do like a regular election. Like we're done with martial law. Like here, I guess you would call it an equivalent of martial law or whatever, except you voted somebody in. What is, I guess that would be democratic martial law. I don't know.
Right.
And now they're opening it up to the people to vote. So
a lot of people refer to it as a military dictatorship, but it really wasn't a dictatorship because we had no presidents all the time. But basically, so they gave it up. Then next came a centrist type of president. And that president was extremely corrupt. He was impeached. He was investigated for corruption. So again, turmoil. And we had come from a big, 20 years or so of traditionalists governing us, the military. And then we had this guy who was a centrist who was no good. So then the Communist Party, now they didn't have any sort of
like opposition. And then the previous two have done not so great. So it's like, well, if these two are so bad and there's nobody to oppose, maybe you guys are okay kind of situation.
Yeah. So they created the Socialist Party. And so we would have the Socialist Party of Brazil. We started having several different socialist parties who were basically just, workers' party, etc. And they had pretty much, as radical of a socialist agenda as you could get. And they got in power, and took them about 20 years to leave power. They weren't necessarily wanting to leave. They bankrupted the country. We had to sort of yank them out of power. And everything that you see here in the US that concerns people on the right wing, I guess, aspect of it, spectrum of it, was something that we wished hadn't happened in Brazil, but it did. And for example, people, the socialist president Lula at the time, he used some of his influence to try to, and there's public school indoctrination, there's huge amounts of corruption, huge amounts of people holding on to power and just not letting go. So,
and did they also like take possession, like ownership of, the economy essentially, or did people own businesses, or were they able to do that? Or was it like, maybe you kind of do, like in Cuba, for example, it's like you have a restaurant, but it's basically the state's restaurant because you have to give them pretty much all of your money?
It wasn't necessarily like that, but the way it was is that, for example, the party that was in power was the Workers' Party. And so if I wanted to open a business, which is what my mother tried to do when she became unemployable, because everybody was pretty much just working for the government. There was no other big employer that people could find jobs with. It was just the government. So she couldn't really work for the government anymore because she had been the attorney for the opposition party. So they kind of blacklisted her. So she tried to open up her own business. And what happens is that there's so much regulation that she wasn't able to keep her doors open. There's a lot of taxes, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of permits, to the point where it's basically, not feasible to have a business. And then you're going back to depending on the government. So that's sort of what they did. When it comes to firearms, it's the same thing. If you look at Brazil, they say that Brazil is a country that allows ownership of firearms. Sure, it does, but there's so much regulation that around it that by the time you actually manage to get a firearm, you're it's unheard of. It's really unheard of.
It's so they make it so challenging and so difficult that you virtually can't get one, which is actually what I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Supreme Court case right now with the issue in New York, because New York, the claim is that they make it so difficult for you to possess a firearm for personal defense that it's essentially restricting their Second Amendment right, which, thank goodness we even can argue that, because when a country doesn't have that sort of thing, you don't even have anything to argue for, because you don't have the protection, doesn't even exist. So
it's they make it physical or like financially, physically, bureaucratically impossible to have any freedom that doesn't depend on the government. So you want to be safe, you got to depend on the police, you got to depend on the government. For that, you're going to need to give us money. You want to have jobs, you got to work for the government. So it's sort of like everything revolves around the government, and the country, that money wasn't getting back to the people. So the inflation, the corruption, etc., the wages were frozen, but the prices of goods kept rising up. The police, of course, wasn't, a lot of the times they weren't even getting paid.
Which means they don't want to do their job, which means they don't want to protect the people because they're not even being paid for their job.
They would stop working, or they would get paid by drug dealers.
Yeah.
So, it's sort of like to look the other way. And sort of it became complete chaos. So I feel like socialism, it can happen in different ways in different countries. People think America is never going to be a socialist country. It doesn't have to be like China. It doesn't have to be like Venezuela or Cuba. It can be like Brazil. It can be like other countries in which, it happens in a different manner, in a more subtle manner, but it's just as debilitating and crippling to the nation.
And I think that happens a lot here because our direct association with socialism, communism is direct with Russia, with, you think about the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s. I was growing up during the Reagan administration. You know what I mean? That was like peak towards the end of like the fight against communism and getting rid of the Red Scourge and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Like that is our association with it, which is a very, I don't want to say purist, because there's a lot of debate about, well, it wasn't really communist or it wasn't really socialist, because if it was, it would have been like this. Again, almost like believing that I think a lot of times that argument happens because people have this utopian view of socialism and communism, and then also don't account for human nature, as if someone who participates in this system is above corruption. Clearly, no human being is above corruption. And it's my belief that socialism and communism, which are cousins, foster corruption, because people in their nature want to advance. They want to do better. And the only way they can do it is by basically screwing the people, because the government is the people. You know what I mean? The country is the people. There's nobody else to screw. It's not like in a capitalist system, if you're making all this money and you start mistreating your customers and your employees and screwing them and stuff like that, you eventually get put out of business. It might take a while, but you get put out of business. So I was looking up Brazil and like a little bit of the history of Brazil and seeing like, you Google, is Brazil socialist? And then you get like these forums that are like, no, it's not. I wish it was. They do this, this, and that. And I'm just kind of like, it's again, that romanticizing of what it could be. So I like that you shared how socialism is not a binary concept. Like it can take form and it can affect a country in different ways. So do you see like, having your experience in Brazil and what happened in Brazil and what you saw happen in Brazil, like parallels with what is happening here in the United States over the last like 10 years and most recently?
So one of the things that I noticed too when I was, I grew up there. I handled, you know, I watched the news every day. I seen things. I saw the things that were going on. So when I came over here, I decided to Google some of these events, some of these facts, and a lot of what I saw, especially people don't go to page 10 of Google. They go to the first, the second, the third, and a lot of it is Reuters is. If you think about it from an indoctrination point of view, where you have the media, where you have all of that, even big tech censorship, I don't know if it's a part of it or if it's sort of just like the algorithm where, these people are paying to get put on the first pages or they have a lot of views and then they end up in the first pages.
Yeah, they have authority and Google likes them, so they go up to the front.
Yeah, and so a lot of those were talking about things that was pretty much not true. Was an article written by somebody who probably never even stepped foot in Brazil, talking about all kinds of romanticizing stuff regarding socialism when people are actually dying. In fact, my hometown has violence levels higher than war zones, higher than, war zones in the Middle East. If you look at, for example, I've been to the Middle East, and if you think of places like Haiti is in many ways, much more dangerous to you and to anyone than the Middle East. So you have levels of violence that aren't even believable, and people wouldn't even talk about it. So, for example, what the government does is that it tries to embezzle the numbers. It tries to make things so that it appears to be in good faith. It appears, so it does things like, for example, one of the Brazil's programs was that the artists would ask for money from the government to do their projects. So they didn't necessarily have to put their own money. They didn't have to find investors. They didn't have to find anything. They would just submit that proposal to the government. They'll get millions and they wouldn't have to pay back. So and you get that if you were a big artist. So they gained the favor of people who influence their fans, etc. So let's say I'm a big singer and I want to write a book, and the book turns out to be a flop. Nobody likes it. It's okay because I already made millions of it. I got it from the government. So I don't have to pay back. I don't have to do anything. So
it's not through like merit. It's not through talent. It's the connections that you have in the government.
Yeah.
And like, I want to create this painting. Let me get this money and make this painting. Now, was anybody dictated or told, not dictated, but kind of like, or maybe dictated, like told what to write, what to paint, what kind of, you know what I mean? If they got that kind of government funding?
So I'm not exactly sure what the contract said, but basically it's sort of like they just wouldn't approve people who were part of the opposition. They just wouldn't give any sort of, they just wouldn't, like with the Google thing, the first few pages is just not something that's opposition. There is no actual unbiased news because the government would give, like what recently in the White House and Twitter, they banned Newsmax journalist, White House correspondent, Emerald Robinson. And so there is no opposition anymore. All the media outlets that are there, they agree with each other. So they only let people in who agree with them. So basically, to go back to your point of the parallels of socialism there and here, I feel like it ends up in the same way. It ends up with poverty. It ends up with misery. It ends up with people losing their rights. But it doesn't just happen like that in the end. Like you just wake up one day and you're in a
socialist regime or whatever.
Yeah, it's like gradual, right?
It's a slow creep. Yeah.
So think of it as like communism. Let's put that aside. But socialism, is a type of government in which you give up a lot of your, personal freedoms and personal properties to the government, and the government allocates that equally throughout the people. That's not really what happens, right? We have all of our public services are crap. They're not supporting people. Public education is terrible. Anything that the government is actually involved in is terrible. They have trillions of dollars in debt. They have trillions of dollars. To me, it's like it's a huge operation that's not actually benefiting people very much. And that's sort of what socialism is you take power and money, freedoms from people, and you tell them you're going to get this back, but you really don't. And
I mean, you get back something. And I think that's the same, because it depends on the personality, but people have a tendency not to default or think of the worst possible scenario. So if I give you my money and you have now relinquished the responsibility, or taken like the responsibility of me having to worry about my health care, you know what I mean? I'm okay. But the problem is that you've given money to someone who has not earned it, who then doesn't really have any attachment to it. So therefore, they're not going to be diligent or good stewards of that money. They're going to spend it. And then if they have friends, they're probably going to, or family, they're probably going to toss it over to them because that is their interests. And so, yeah, maybe you get it back with some kind of healthcare, but what is the quality of that healthcare is the issue. Not to mention that you're taking away really any incentive for people to create or advance in treatments, because they're not going to gain any reward for it, because like the government has set a specific price on how much you can earn in order to control the cost. So yeah, you get something back, but it's never going to be as good as you think it is. You're going to have to give something up, not to mention how many people are going to be using it.
Yeah. If you think of like, if I'm giving up all that money to the government in exchange for believing that they will provide me with a service, I'm basically giving away my financial power, my purchase power. And that's a big part of my freedom, right? A part of my freedom is to be able to choose who will be my healthcare provider, etc. But I'm giving that up to the government because I believe that they can do a better job at it than me, that they can do a better research, that they can get better prices, etc. I'm giving all that power to somebody. And even if we had somebody great in the White House, we had the Mahatma Gandhi of the United States. Who's to say that 4 years from now, we're not going to have somebody in the White House that's going to use all that money and all that power for very evil purposes? Who's to say? Now that you've given up that freedom, that power to the government, it can be used against you. You're not going to have Mahatma Gandhi in the White House forever. If you do, it's a dictatorship, right? And so that's how they sort of like go down the path of dictatorship, because they're like, oh, we don't want this power to go down to the wrong hands, so we're going to keep it for now. So it's a slippery slope where maybe someday some very evil person is going to take over the White House. And now they have all this money. Now they have all this power, and you don't. They're going to use it against you. So to me,
like life isn't a constant. Like there's this idea that, well, if I do this program, then that's exactly what it's going to be. And it's going to be, life isn't a constant thing.
It's a fantasy. It's just like not reality. These people are out of their minds. I mean, if you have all this power, if you have all this money, why would you ever let go? And a lot of it also, even if this person is, a good person in their hearts, they may be misguided through a lot of projects and a lot of their mindsets. And so they may be putting a lot of effort into different things. They may be thinking, oh, you know what, in order for us to better society, we're going to need to imprison all these domestic terrorists who are out posting bad things on Twitter. If we're going to have to, publicly execute people who are trying to say that their kids should not be learning this critical race theory. So it's sort of like a lot of it, people are doing, they think that they're doing good, but they're not. and they don't see it.
I mean, that is dangerous in the sense of like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, I believe is the saying. So you're like, well, I'm doing it for the greater good, or, just, if I do this one more thing, like it'll be better. And that's a dangerous thing. But also what's very dangerous right now, for me personally, is ambivalence, is kind of like disconnection, not wanting to confront, not wanting to push back, because we have definitely, I believe, entered into a period of a cultural war, because here in the United States, it's about holding on to the values of freedom and independence and being able to speak your mind, like all of these core values, which are instilled in our Constitution. But we've been so privileged, and that's just a fact in the life here in the United States, that we have this illusion that things that you just described could never happen.
They're happening already. I mean, the things have already been in motion. When you think about all the stuff that's related to the pandemic, how can somebody tell me to close down my business? How can somebody tell me to not go outside and get locked down in my own house and not even go outside for exercise? How can somebody tell me this? How can somebody tell me that? How can somebody tell me to inject a vaccine into my body that I don't want to? How can somebody, all of these things that you think, how can they do that? It has been in the process of doing for a long time, for a very long time. We're just not paying attention. It's like I think that they say here, the frog in the boiling water.
Yeah. It's like the slow boil. So the frog's in water and it's coming to a slow boil.
Yeah, it goes from that point where the water is nothing is happening to it's boiling, like in the blink of an eye. And so you want to try to avoid boiling alive by realizing, hey, this water is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. It's getting more uncomfortable, and getting out of it. But people are just they're not seeing the leading signs. They're thinking that this can never happen in the USA. And so a lot of people got shell-shocked with some of the restrictions that came about into their lives after this pandemic. And after, that's a lot of it has been put in place for a long time. Locally with all these laws, how can they do this? They can't, because they voted on this law a long time ago and you didn't care. You didn't pay attention to it. So now they're using it. They're amassing all this power little by little. And when it hits you in the face, it's going to knock you out. So it's sort of like, it's basically my whole activism here in the US is like, guys, this is dangerous. This is a slippery slope. This is what's going to happen. And it happens every time. It's not because I can't see the future or I'm like a psychic. I've just seen it. I've seen it happen before. It's the exact same thing. It's the same playbook. The results in different countries are a little bit different because it depends on the population.
There's different cultures. There's different cultures. There's different things that they'll take different shapes, different things that you'll accept.
But the result is just, it's bad. The US is going to be different than China because people in the US are allowed to, let's say, have weapons. So it's going to maybe be a little bit slower because if you try to go too fast at people, they might fight back. So you want to try to get people one by one. You want to try to enact laws that say that if you don't agree with the government, then you're a domestic terrorist. So they want to make you disarmed. They want to make you, like that thing where parents who go to the school board meetings are to be considered domestic terrorists, whatever.
Yeah, the letter from the memo from the AG Merrick after the school board, the National Association of, I think the National School Board Association wrote to Biden actually requesting it. And they had to back off of that eventually because people got pissed, like come mess with people's kids and see what happens.
They had to back off now.
Yeah.
But 2 years from now, they're still going to be pushing that in a way that they are probably lobbying for it. They're probably putting money into candidates to run for office that have that kind of mentality. So you just don't know what's happening in the background. And when it does happen, it's going to hit you in the face. So I think it's very important for people to realize the realities of all these false illusions that they fall for. If you want to be a feminist, you're going to have to give up on having a family, on having kids. One of the most beautiful things that happen to a woman or a person is to have a family. You're going to be all alone. You're going to be, going to have a career that if you die tomorrow, they're going to replace you the next day. There's going to be a job opening the next day. And so what are you really building? Who are you trying to impress? What are you really trying to show?
Well, and that you just said right there, it makes me think, it just made me have that thought that, for me, I don't currently have children. But I have a lot of friends that have children, and I have a great love and appreciation for children because I know that what is happening now is going to affect them in the future. But when you grow up with a mindset, or when you accept an ideology such as feminism, which is a very self-reflective, selfish ideology. It's about what I can do, what satisfies me, what makes me feel successful, my truth, all that kind of BS. Like when you are in that mindset, I think it opens up your mind and your heart to ideas like socialism, because you are no longer having to invest in the future because you don't have children. You aren't thinking outside of yourself. You're thinking about what can be provided to you.
Yeah, you want life to be easier, and you want to be provided for, and you want to, you don't want to have to worry about shopping for healthcare. You don't want to have to worry. It's sort of like, but you also want to compensate in a way. You think that you're doing the good thing, but you also don't want to do the research. You also don't want to look into it. You just want to feel good about yourself. You just want to feel, and it's the whole thing with feminism. I have a career, and I know very well that, what my priorities are and what I'm going to have to give up and how am I going to juggle everything as I decide to have, children, etc. But I know what I have to give up now. I know the family time that I have to give up now. I know. So I used to work for this big company, and there was this, women leadership group, whatever, that I joined. And one of the women was extremely high up in the company. She was as high as you can go. And so I asked her, I told her, I'm young. I'd like to have children one day. I know you do have a couple of children, but you also are very successful. You're very high up. How do you manage to take care of your children, and to also succeed in your career? And she said, I don't. She had to give up. She had to give up one thing for the other. Yeah. And she had no excuse for it. She did just admit that she didn't have time for her children. They basically had to raise themselves because she chose the career. And she was like, I don't have nothing to say. It is what it is. I couldn't do both at the same time. And you're only one person. It's okay to ask for help. You don't have to be, this badass person. Like, I believe every person should be able to know how to rely on themselves a little bit. And that's fine. But for you to become, this Hollywood stereotype type of, badass woman, there's a lot of things that are going to need to happen to change your mindset, to basically damage your soul in order for you to actually become that person. So, like for an athlete, we turn on the TV and we watch the Olympics and we see them do that big show. We don't know all the thousands of hours that they've spent, all the injuries, all the things that they had to give up, all the trauma, those women, those gymnasts.
Yeah. And I think as women, we just need to, because I say this to my girlfriends, and I run a women's community, and we have these discussions. And, the point here is, as women, and at the core of, the original feminist movement was like for women to be able to do what they want to do. If they want to work, that they can work. If they want to stay home, that they should be able to stay home. And right now there's this mentality, sometimes that if you're staying home, then you're not really contributing to society, or it's kind of looked down upon. But then at the same time, there are women who choose to stay home and then turn their nose at women that decide to work because, well, how, and especially if they have kids, and it's like, well, how can you not want to be with your kids all the time? And I really think it's unfair. Of course, I have a preference. Like, I think a 2-person household is the best for children, and that for children to have somebody at home. But at the same time, like, it is not for me to dictate to women what they should do. What we do need women to understand is that regardless of which you choose, you're going to have to give something up. And the lie that we've been told for so long is that we can do both, or we can have it all. And that's just not true. And I think it's really, disingenuous, unfair, and stressful to kind of, follow into that narrative of like, I could do everything and I can have it all. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, people just forget about the human nature in all these different scenarios. They forget about human nature in feminism. They forget about it in socialism. They just, they don't think of it until it happens, and they're like, "Oh my God, what do I do now? Like, now I'm stuck here, working 2 jobs, have 2 kids, have to cook when I get home, have to, go to college online." Like, you have all these different things that you didn't necessarily think of. And I think prevention is the best tool in a lot of things in life. So if you can think ahead of some of these things and consider human nature and consider, reality, just basic reality, then you understand that a lot of these ideologies are just a trap made for you to just, fall into and become very unhappy with yourself and more controllable.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap us up because we've been talking for about an hour, but I wanted to see if there's anything else that you wanted to maybe advise or share. My hope is when someone hears this, that at some point there will be someone that will listen to this and be curious about the conversation and maybe not be fully aware of the cultural war or battle that we're facing right now and how socialism and these ideas are creeping in. And maybe they're uncomfortable with vocalizing it or don't even know what to do about it. If someone were to ask you that question, what should I do? What should I say? Like, how did you do it? Because a lot of times when you speak up right now, we're in an environment where it can be very hostile. Like, do you have any words of encouragement that you'd like to share before we close up?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to be human. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to take things one step at a time. Everybody feels overwhelmed. Everybody feels afraid, but we just move forward either way. Having the political persecution of my family at home, I had to think about, am I ready to possibly undergo this again? And I'm afraid. Of course, I think about it all the time. But I just decide to press on anyway, because I have a support system around me, because I know that if I fall, if I have questions, if I have moments of doubt, that I have people that can be there for me. So don't be afraid to just be human. Think, you're not perfect. Pride is going to be your downfall. Think about, all the ways in which your own actions were what caused your current situation. How can you change that? By working on yourself, by allowing yourself to understand that you can make mistakes, forgive yourself, and just, life is not a race. You're not Batman. Just, every day, take it little by little. Sometimes if you just do just a little, it's good enough. You don't have to, be 100 miles an hour. Just know where you're going and don't allow yourself to be bullied.
Well, that's awesome. I thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate that you shared your story and people can learn a little bit more about Brazil. And, we have a tendency to let our guards down and think that things can never happen here because we just have one picture and one image of what socialism and oppression looks like. So I think it was really good and important that you were able to share that story. If anybody wants to find you or follow you, where can they find you?
So I'm everywhere on my handle everywhere is Real Julia Song. So if you go into an app and you type Real Julia Song and I'm not there, it's because I'm not in that app. But I use Twitter, Telegram, and Carbon a lot, and even Gab. So if you go on this Carbon, Twitter and Gab are social media platforms. Telegram is sort of like here and there. It's in between, you know, but I do have the comment section available so people can interact with each other. They can interact with me a little bit. So if you go onto these 4 platforms, you'll be able to find me and have some of these conversations and get a lot of my content, my articles that I write. You'll be those will be accessible to you. So
yeah,
that's
and
about
I'll be
it.
sure to include all of those in the link in the bio in the show notes. Thank you so much again, Julia, for hanging out with us. And you are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to It's Mercedes, honest conversations for freedom-minded women. You can find the show notes for this episode at itsmercedes.com. And if you're loving the podcast, I would be so honored if you would go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a 5-star review. You can also connect with me on Instagram at itsmercedes or join my email list. Until next time, stay free and stay honest.